I would like to call the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee meeting of May the 8th to order. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of emergency, please evacuate the council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given by our clerk, Trish. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you've evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of the town hall. Also, the Town of Lincoln committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Please remember to silence all cellular devices. Roll call, we do have everyone in the building. We have the mayor on a conference call will be joining us, as well as the CAO and Councillor McPherson should be joining us momentarily. I'd like to thank all staff that are in attendance this evening. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. There are no statutory public meetings on the agenda this evening, and delegations, we have no delegations this evening. Consent agenda, we have none. So we'll jump right into the regular agenda. We are now considering item 7.1, PW 12-19, Elizabeth Street Road Reconstruction Project Award. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. Through you, just a question with regards to the engineering services. So we're approving them to Associated Engineering at a cost of $88,334, but in the estimated project cost summary, it lists the contract administration and full-time inspection at $103,000.
Director Graham, can you comment on that?
Through Mr. Chairman to Councillor Pachariva, I believe, and I will double check, but there is geotechnical testing and material testing is in, there's more of that in the 103. So the 88,000 that you're awarding in the recommendation is correct. And I think if you go to the table 2 where all the costs are, there should be more for geotechnical testing, like the 103 is an overall cost with geotechnical testing, even though there is a geotechnical testing of 7,500. So I don't think we have that split out correctly in the table. But thanks for pointing that out. Mm-hmm. The recommendation is correct though, of 88,000.
Okay, and then that doesn't change the total project cost.
Mr. Chairman, no, it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rinjaba.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. I wanted to talk a little bit about when, during the campaign period, I was speaking to people in the Drake survey, and they had concerns about when the construction was done there, some of their driveways had been partially torn up and they weren't able to come up. When they had approached the town and asked if there was a way that they could cost share on having their whole driveway done, there was nothing in the contract. The contractor was not able to do it. They said there was nothing in the contract that allowed them to do such a thing and to cost share on having their entire driveway done. So I had, during the agenda review, I spoke to this, and I wanted to let everybody know that Director Graham had offered to look into this and see if there's a way that we can offer residents a situation where they can have their driveway done, redone from top to bottom and cost share in that, so that they're not ending up with a mess after construction's done.
Thank you, Counselor. Yes, we did talk about that in the agenda. I do believe Director Graham did, say that typically there are some concerns with, paving contractors coming on private property. But Director Graham, did you want to expand on Counselor Rinjama's comment? I do appreciate you bringing it to the committee's attention. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Rajima. We definitely will talk to the contractor, after we award the contract through council. We'll be having a pre-construction meeting. We'll talk to the contractor to see whether them or their subs would do more paving. The issue is, if we do part of the driveway, say the front of it, as a result of the road works, when we put in the curbs and things like that, we sometimes have to adjust the driveway grading. Sometimes residents would like to pave the rest of the driveway, and that would be a cost at their cost. We would help facilitate that. But again, it depends on the contractor. Some contractors are hesitant with their policies to work on private property. Others might, so we will talk to this specific contractor to see what their position is on that, and see how we can help out the residents with their requests, so.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard of this a number of times. People really feel that it's really important to them that we can come up with a solution for them. So, thank you.
I think the interesting point is that the contractor in reference in Drake and Marguerite is the same contractor we're potentially awarding this to in a few minutes, so it's the same contractor. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. Through you to Mr. Graham. Dave, I just noticed that the total project cost is coming in like over 300,000 less than what we budgeted for. So I'm just wondering what will happen with the 300 plus. Will that be put towards other projects? Or if you could just explain to me how that works.
Through Mr. Chairman to Councillor Timmers, a good question. Basically, what we would do is, I can't recall specifically how the project is funded, whether it involves a debt component or a reserve, but what we would do in this case is, obviously, we wouldn't have to spend as much money, and that extra money would go back into those funding streams that have been allocated at budget time. So depending on how the project is funded, like there's different funding streams, development charges play a role, reserves, could be debt financing as well. So however it was funded at budget time, that extra surplus would go back into those funding streams.
Okay.
It wouldn't have to be used.
Okay, makes sense. I'm really happy to see that huge surplus though. Like that's a big surplus. So that was something that jumped out at me. And also the trees, there's going to be tree planting. So that 25,000 is above and beyond, or is that included? Sorry, Mr. Chair, through to Mr. Graham.
Through Mr. Chairman to Councillor Timmers, so that tree allowance is still within that surplus. So,
Okay.
And again, just for committee's information, it's a pilot program that we'd like to try this year, a boulevard tree planting program. Again, so the trees would be located on town property, so they would be the town's to maintain in the future, not have to be a responsibility of the property owner. But I think it's a really great initiative to promote beautification on our streets, streetscaping. Again, even when we look at incorporating sustainable communities, you want to have street trees for a number of reasons, for shade and things like that with hot weather. So I think it's a really good initiative. So we'd like to pilot it, see how it goes, and then consider it on other urban road reconstruction projects that we do in the future.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all for trees, and the more you plant, the better, in my opinion. So I think it's great. And just one more question, Chair Brunei, through to Mr. Graham. Can you just give me a basic timeline? Like just how long, when do we start, how long will it take, just basic? Just if residents ask, I have that information.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Timmers. So what will happen next is after the contract's awarded, we'll meet with the contractor and kind of confirm their construction schedule and when they're available to start. But we anticipate a project like this would probably take about 3 months. It's a large project. We're gonna be doing underground sewers, road work, curbs, sidewalks, et cetera. So we figure it's about 3 months of work. Probably thinking June is when we'll be starting it, sometime in June. And we're hoping, again, to maybe do a lot of the heavy work through the summer when school's out, because there's a lot of kids in that area that walk to St. Mark's School. So if we can coordinate that, that's what we'd like to look at doing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks very much, Director Graham. During our agenda review, we did address the fact that there will be some overlap of not only this project, but the beginning and the construction of Prokich Park. So hopefully that will all be communicated through Shannon to the residents as well as Public Works. So I appreciate, again, this is another great example of getting a tender out in early April, April 2nd, the tender closed, and 7 bids, and as Councillor Timmers has pointed out, well within our budget. So great job. So there being no further discussion, we have a motion to receive and file report PW 12-19 for the Elizabeth Street Road Reconstruction Project Award, to approve the contract for the Elizabeth Street Road Reconstruction Project for the tender amount of $1,434,293, excluding HST, to Nexterra Substructures, Inc., and approve the firm of Associated Engineering to be retained to provide engineering services at a cost of $88,334, and approve the mayor and the town clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. Councillor Pachariva is going to move the motion, and all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 7.2, PW-13-19, amend rates and charges for the supply of water for manual meter reads. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Rinjima.
Thank you, Chair Brene. I know that, this is a long time coming. It's we have to do this, and it's the right thing to do. I know there's going to be concerns from people in the community. They're going to have questions, some. Question, how are we going to educate people on what this is about and get the word out so people don't have concerns about people coming on their property, changing the meter, and what the meter means to them?
Great question. I know that when we had the, I think the report from Jillian, we did discuss that, but Carrie, did you want to comment on that, or do we want to go through Public Works? Ms. Beatty?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Sure, I can comment, and then if Director Graham wants to provide any more concrete timelines. But we do have a project meeting coming up on May 13th, so just to let council know, following that meeting, I will send a detailed briefing note out to council that's outlining the proposed activities and the timelines associated with that, as well as some other background information so that you have that available for your constituents. It is a phased approach, right, that we're going to be doing. So our initial is a direct mail out to residents, so that'll be townwide, also from the vendor, so there'll be 2, and that'll be the first one. So that's kind of going to be introductory. We're looking at like early June for that. And then in July, when that first zone goes out, that's when we'll do another direct mail. But we'll also have social media, website FAQs. As I said, we'll have a briefing note. We'll have door knockers available as well that the vendor will be using. They have a whole other strategy themselves in terms of encouraging people to book appointments and the customer service component that they'll be providing. I'm just looking here what other things we have. The online customer service portal will be key as well, and then we'll continue to do follow-up letters. So we're kind of using that first zone as sort of our assessment in terms of the strategies we're proposing. If it goes well, then we'll continue to use that. If we need to reassess and be flexible and adapt, we'll do that as well. So, but we will have something more concrete out to you following that May 13th meeting where we've got timelines and the zones are assigned.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor, could you?
Oh.
Thank you. Counselor McPherson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my question's along the lines of Councilor Regima, and really looking at the piece in the report that talks about people that refuse to allow us to go into their home, and you know, it's very disappointing to me that we would have in our bylaw the acceptance of people refusing us to come into their home. If this is a town water system, you know, to me, that is what it is. We need to get into your home to to update the equipment. I'd make that charge $500 or $1,000. You know, it's not deterrent enough to allow people. We need to change the system. So let's not accept failure in the bylaw. Let's just put the change, and let's tell them, you don't agree to allow us to come in, it's gonna cost you $500 a year, or $1,000 a year. And from a communication standpoint, you know, to me, the website and social media isn't gonna do it. It's not gonna do it. You know, we probably need 2-3 letters going out to our residents, right to their door, saying, here's what's gonna happen, and here's the timeline. So, you know, I think Carrie, you mentioned the other night that, you know, social media is probably gonna get 10% of our residents, you know, and then as many hits as we get on our website, I guarantee you, we're not gonna reach much more than that 10% through the website. So this has got to be a mail piece, whether it comes in their water bill or whether it comes in a direct mail, and we gotta do it more than once. It's to me, like marketing. You've got to tell them, and you gotta tell them again. So, the two things there, you know, I think we're ready to accept a refusal of people that don't want us coming into their home, and there's a little bit of a penalty to do that. I think we gotta make that tougher, and we just gotta tell them this has to happen, and then the communication piece has to be a very, you know, tell them again, and needs to show up at their door. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Graham, did you want to make a comment on that? And maybe you could just confirm, because I know when Deputy Chair Rinjima and I had our conference call with Shannon, we had a discussion. There was a comment, I believe, I could be wrong, but we had a conversation that it was 105 a year, and then I'm understanding now it's 105 a quarter, so 420 a year. So you're nodding your head. That's a confirmation. Did you want to make any comments on Councillor McPherson's question? Comments?
Through Mr. Chairman to Councillor McPherson, I agree with a lot of the comments being said for sure. In terms of the charge, we're looking at a cost recovery, so it's really the cost for us to go out and read the meters and then process a bill that way. So that's kind of how that cost is put together. But again, just for clarification, it's $105 per quarter, so per year it's about $425. Again, we're hoping we're not going to have to use this fee. It's just we're getting prepared and getting it in place now, so at least it's in place. When we've talked to other municipalities who have gone through a similar program, they said that it's good to have this in place, and for people who are maybe not as cooperative at first or not participating, we can talk about the fee that will come if you if you don't participate and it's in place. So I think that's an advantage to have the fee in place early on before you get started. So that's there. And yes, we're planning on, and getting back to the communication, we are planning on doing a mail out, 2 mail outs, and I mean, Carrie can speak to this a little bit further, but for sure, we want to get letters to the doors. That would be, you know, our mandate with this project.
I turned off my mic, but, I mean, 425 is better than 105. Thank you.
Counselor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. I think my question was almost, the same. It was around the people who are going to refuse. And I guess I'm trying to figure out why they would refuse and what kind of numbers are we anticipating? Maybe it's a better communication or understanding of what you're gonna do. Like, maybe when people understand, they won't refuse? I don't know if you have any comment to that. Do you foresee a lot of people refusing, or? And if they are, they'll have time to agree before they are hit up with these fees? Like, will they have a window of?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, Councillor Timmers, I hope we don't have to deal with many of these. I think a lot's gonna depend on how we communicate, make sure we have lots of frequently asked questions, make people feel as comfortable as possible of what we're gonna do, I know our contractor is gonna be very flexible in scheduling appointments to change someone's meter. We're gonna be able to do it after hours, on weekends. We wanna be as convenient as possible, because we do understand that, we have to get in people's basements and houses to change a meter. So I think it's how we approach the program. We wanna be flexible, convenient, work with people. And again, I agree with you. It's how we communicate and the level of information so people are well informed of what to expect. Like I said, when we've spoken to other municipalities, it's sort of, it really depends. They normally don't have a lot of people refusing, but again, we're just kind of doing this to get ready and have it in our back pocket at this point.
Okay, fair enough. I think if people understand exactly what we're doing, I can't see that many refusing. I think the other issue around communication, advertising, is people are a little leery right now about anyone talking to them about water in their house, or, they have to be sure that this is legit. Because I know there's so many different scams going around door to door, so if it's well communicated to them, I'm sure we shouldn't have too many people refusing, I wouldn't think, but anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Counselor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was just about that specification about the charge, is it by quarter or by visit? My only point would be to make sure that when the bylaw is drafted, that it does specify that 2019 charge is $105 per quarter or per visit, not just leaving it open. 2019 charge is $105, because again, it may be open to interpretation and pushback if we're ever challenged on it, so just that.
Good point. Counselor Patriva.
Thanks, Chair Brunei, and I'm going to pick up on the communication thing. I think it's very important that we utilize the water bill. We've already got a mailing going to the house stating them how much they have to pay. We know we ran into those issues with the service line, and that communication, and Councilor Timmers, you raised a great point. Water softener, water heater, water blankets, you name it. There's people are leery of this, so we've already got in a vehicle going into the people's house, the water bill. So let's communicate that directly with that. People are apt to open that because it's a bill. Having been at the post office the other day, inquiring about things for work, they'll pick up on that more than they will something separately. So, we've got a vehicle, it's going to their house, they need to open it, they need to pay the bill, and we read it. But then follow up with those other various media streams. But I don't know why we would send something separately. Hopefully, it lines up with the current billing structure.
Carrie.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So Councillor Patriva and other members of council, we certainly hear your comments around comprehensive communications, and I want to reassure you that it's top of mind for us as well. So in response to Councillor Patriva, unfortunately, our water bills do not align with the cycle, but we are going to do a direct mail. So it will get directly to their home, and it will actually be a very specific piece of mail. So we think that will have some success. So that will be the town-wide one, and then again, another letter will be direct mailed when we start at their particular zone, so it's timely and relevant again. And then with all of the additional and supplementary communications, we feel that those two direct mails plus the others should be okay. But as we said, we're going to assess that in the first zone, and if it isn't, then we'll be incorporating other strategies as we move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Beatty. Mary Easton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the background, I'm curious to know what would happen if a person said that they were not going to allow anyone to come into their home, and so they didn't have an updated water meter. Now there's a contract, there's no one coming around to do that. What happens to those people? Say there's 500 people in the town that don't accept a new meter. How do their water bills get calculated?
And not only that, the water meters aren't accurate, so we've got water loss. Director Graham?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor, again, we would have to go out physically and read these meters. A lot of times the meters, we don't always have to get into the house to read the meters. There's like a touch pad on the side of the house that we would swipe to read the meters. So we would have to manually go out and do that, and then process the bill based on what staff reads in the field. So, not ideal, could be done if we need to until we can get people on board with the new meter, but they'd be getting charged their water bill still for sure, but
And counterproductive to what we're trying to do here, because some of the expense is to reduce the labor of having the meter reader goes out. So, Mary Easton?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to go back to Councillor McPherson's initial point. I mean, $425 is not going to cut it, you know, if in fact we allow that to happen. And so let's just think about what happened with our last attempt to get the backflow valves in. And this is not a fault of staff, but I don't know that we built enough safeguards in the first place. And it went on and on and on, and I think there may be still some people that aren't quite with the program there. So we do want to be clear about the message and very firm, and so the communication has to include, and I'm not sure who spoke earlier about the Q&A, you know, the most frequently asked questions, maybe it was Mr. Graham. People need to understand, I think that penalty may not be enough. We may have to reconsider that if we find that there just isn't the movement that we need. Because at $1,000 a year, we might get people's attention, but it's probably a little bit too much, you know, to just lay that on at the beginning. But if we ended up with 500 people, that could really create quite a ringer in a system where we have a planned outcome, which is to the benefit of the public. We're saving water, which we absolutely need to. And we are saving the cost of having additional personnel. So somehow we have to get that across to people. So I don't know what the rule is any longer, but when you're teaching somebody something, I thought it was 8 times. It may be less. I'm sure Ms. Beatty knows what the current thinking is. But at one time, you had to repeat something about 8 times before people cottoned on to it. So, I mean, I have no problem with where we're going. This is absolutely the right thing to do. But we should be prepared to do some incremental adjusting if that's needed. And let's not let it go on as long as, you know, it has in the past, because then it just loses some of its impetus. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
So further to the questions and to Councillor Russell's comment, like the current bylaw, 2019-XX, refers to specifically 105 per quarter. This motion that we're about to read states that, you know, this draft bylaw would come into effect January the 1st, 2020, unless otherwise indicated. So, you know, Director Graham, do we have enough time here to discuss this, even though we read this motion? I'm thinking yes, but.
Where's the 105? I didn't even see it.
through Mr. Chairman, absolutely. I mean, the program, we're hoping to be complete with all the meter change-outs probably February of 2020. So by all means, we have lots of time to you know, reconsider this, think about it. Staff can bring updates to council on the program. You'll be getting updates. We can talk about, you know, how participation's going, and again, if we need to reconsider what we're looking at tonight, we have time to do that.
Thank you. Mary Easton, did you have any more questions?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mikla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, I'm going to beat this up a little bit more, but I think what's going to happen when we go into these houses and check out these water meters, I think we're going to find out why some people have the greenest grass on the street. And I would suspect that there's some that may have bypassed the meter. And if that's the case, then $105 a quarter might be still a pretty cheap lawn. So that's where I would suspect the resistance or the pushback from allowing people into their basement may occur. And heavens forbid, should that water meter be somewhere near the sump pump, we also may discover who's bypassing sump pump water, discharging it into the sanitary system. So this is where I think I'm with everybody that fine, $105, per quarter, that's not sufficient enough in my view to deter anybody from possibly defrauding the town. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Councillor McPherson.
So, Mr. Chair, do we need an amendment here, or do we need a change to the bylaw, or are we just going to vote on this and turn it down? So,
Just going to go to the CAO for a comment, but that was exactly what has been running through my mind for the last
Yeah.
3 minutes. So let's come back to that.
Okay.
Mr. CAO.
Through your Chair, Brene, just to provide a little bit of clarity, and I did just confirm with our deputy clerk who's here this evening. If council does want to change that, you absolutely can change that. Right now, you can increase that, and it'll be ratified at council, and the change will be made. But of course, we are in council's hands should you want to do that.
Councillor McPherson.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if it wouldn't make sense to take a dollar figure completely out of the bylaw and do the communication, do the install and assess at that point, what are we dealing with? If we got 100% participation, we're in great shape. But, what come back in the fall and say, okay, we've got 100 homes won't do it. Then we put a bylaw in place that says, okay, for those 100 that aren't doing it, you're paying, $1,000 a year or $2,000 a year, whatever the number is. Would that, I mean, to stick a number in now, to me, it still allows a person to say, well, I have an out on this particular item, for whatever they're bypassing for, to Councillor Miklick's point, or doing whatever, they've got an opportunity to say, well, that still makes sense to me, so I'll just pay the fine. But if we then assess, okay, what is the size of our issue, right after we do the installation, come back and say, well, council, we've got this number of homes that said no. Okay, let's deal with that. Just a suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mary Stin.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we should go into this with goodwill and see where it takes us, and then we'll come back, we'll have more information, we'll make another decision at the time, and we'll do it within the scope of what the problem is and what we need to do to hopefully get 100% compliance. I would be quite satisfied with that, because Councillor Miklick may, I think we should do his cellar first, actually. Anyway, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, that's not very appropriate.
Point of order. Point of order.
My apologies. I'm actually, I'll support, I support where Councillor McPherson's coming from. We need to get ahead of this, but we don't need to go in with you know, heavy-duty.
Gloves off.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else, Madam Mayor?
Well, I mean, I can make an amendment. If, I thought though that Counselor McPherson was going to do it, so I would just amend that that section 5, item 9 of Schedule A to the bylaw, I would just remove all of that section there, under the miscellaneous charges. Just don't make any mention of it at all.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, if I could just provide a little bit of advice to members of council on this, just having talked with staff, and I think I'd ask that you give me a chance to go away between now and council, and if we need to bring this back at council for approval, we can do that. There's a motion this evening that'll approve accepting the report. Let us go away and look at how this fee is actually calculated. My understanding it is on a cost recovery basis, and I just want to get some clarification on actually what parameters and what data points we'd need to include in increasing it versus coming up with an amount right now. So I would maybe suggest through the chair to members of council, approve the report this evening. If we need to come back on the bylaw piece, we can do that between now and council.
Thank you, Mr. Kokopoulos. I do have 3 other counselors in the queue here, so I'm going to continue to go through there, but I appreciate your clarity. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment about removing that, the penalty phase in the beginning, in the onset. What impetus would there be then for anyone to want to change that water meter? If we're not saying if you don't, there's going to be a penalty within that first quarter after the fact. Like, there's, just based on past experience when water meters have got swapped out in other municipalities I've lived in, there's always some concern that sometimes the new ones don't work as well, or there's potential that all of a sudden rates could go up as a result of those new meters. So there's always a little bit of dubious thought about that swap in itself. So I don't see why we'd want to take that out. You can always go back down the road and up it if you find after 3 quarters in, there's still 600 or 1,000 people out there that haven't switched it. Well, okay, up it to $500 per quarter. Like, start ramping it up each year to make sure that A, we get our costs recovered, but there is that incentive for them to do it. And again, ramping it up right off the bat, I don't want to penalize anybody that may be out of country, maybe down south for a lot of time, that they come back and all of a sudden they've got an extra $105 charge, which, again, to a lot of people, that is a lot of money. So, again, I think that removing it altogether is, I don't know if that's the best idea, but I think down the road, to Mayor's point, there's an escalation way, or we can escalate that up to make sure that it is impactful, so.
No, I think it's a good point. I think the CAO has come up with a comment that, you know, if we continue to go through with the motion the way it is and allow him to, you know, discuss it with staff, we can reassess this, but I think at this point, I appreciate your comments, and I agree with them. Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Bernay. Along the same lines as Councillor Russell, the increase in the penalty charge, I agree with. And if we don't have an amount to start with, that's fine, but they need to know there's a penalty charges will apply. So if there's an amount initially, that's fine, but that they know that gives us the option to make that whatever at whatever time we need. So,
Agreed.
thank you.
Councillor Pachariva.
Thanks, Chair Bernay. I'm on the same page as Councillor Russell and Councillor Reimer. I think you need to have something there to start with. There's got to be a penalty for not adhering to the process. And the thing is too, and I think we need to leave ourselves open-ended too, and Mr. Kokopoulos said he would go back and get the rationale behind that cost recovery. Like, after our rollout, say we have 500 that haven't adhered to it, to the building. You might have, like, depending on where they're spaced, it might take the reader 2 weeks to actually read those meters. Gas at $1.30 a liter, it's not going down. We might find that this $105 isn't enough. So we're already behind the 8 ball. So I would like to have that looked at. You know, back to Councillor McPherson's initial thing. You know what? We want people to buy in. We want them to do this. It behooves everyone to you know, to get on board with this program. It's about efficiency. It's about conservation. But there's, again, there's always that, you know, hesitance that, you know, Big Brother is watching and there's a chip placed in that water meter that's like a Google and it's going to do their every movement through the house. Well, no, that's not going to happen. It's about water. But you are going to get that out there. That's, unfortunately, there are people that do not like government of any way, shape, or form, and I can think of a few.
So just when you come to a meeting and think there'll be no discussion on something, but all good discussion, all well vetted, and so we, see, Councillor Michalak? So we have a motion. I'm just going to tweak, instead of approve, I'm going to say that we're going to receive the 2019 manual quarterly meter read for non-AMA equipped meter charge as outlined in the Public Works Report PW 1319. And leave it at that, okay? I will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Thank you. We will now consider item 7.3, CS-08-19, the Town of Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center, home of the Jordan Historical Museum of the 20 policy revisions. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. This was a pleasant read, sitting at the Firestone Clinic today. I had time on my hands. But just to comment, when we're updating policies, might it, and maybe it's just me and you can tell me I'm offside, but wouldn't it be better to just have the changes in policy with a strike through so we actually see where they are? Like reading this, I don't know what's updated as opposed to what was there initially. And then, like, we see that report a couple pages, you know, further on, where we look at the policy, and we've got the old policy and the new policy, but simply by just taking that old policy and putting the strike-throughs where the changes are, the staff knows what the changes are, but council doesn't know what the changes are, so just an ask.
Shannon? Thank you for accommodating us. We'll try to go lightly. So, Councillor Pachariva, did you have, your question is received. Did you have anything specific beyond that, or you just, I mean, you've made a comment, which I think is apropos. But with Ms. McKay at the podium, did you have something specific that you'd like?
Well, I do. I'm shut off, Councilor B. I'm back on.
You're back on.
Okay, good evening, Ms. McKay. One of the things I want to applaud you for is that, you know, reading this and the storing of artifacts and things like that, the days of storing them in a non-climate controlled barn have gone by the wayside, so thank you very much.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, certainly going forward, when we bring policy changes, if it's easier for members of council to see us present the changes with a strike-through and then an updated, we can certainly do that.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, very, very lengthy and thorough report. You know, I think not knowing what was there before, you know, my question would be, you know, is this a significant, and maybe to Councillor Patrice's question, is this a significant overhaul, if you will, of policy, or let me ask you this straight out, is this brand new policy? Like, did we have this before? Not even knowing where we were prior to this. Is this creating a policy around all these items? That's my first question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, these policies existed. In fact, there was quite a large overhaul before I started with the town of Lincoln in 2016 that was brought forward to members of council. So these are requirements to meet our provincial community museum operating grant funding and the standards. So every community museum that has maintained its museum standards has to meet these standards. And as they make changes at the province, they communicate that out to the museums, and we incorporate them into updated policies, so that on an annual basis, when we submit the CMOG funding, we submit our updated policies.
Okay. So digging into it, and there's, you know, as the mayor said, there's a lot here, so hopefully, you know, I'm allowed more than 2 questions, because I've got a number going through here. So looking at collection management, and here you reference a collection committee. So is that something that exists today, or is that to be created? And the other one is, you know, in this is trained museum staff, and maybe you could speak to what we mean by trained museum staff.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, staff right now form the collections committee. They review the potential artifacts as they come in. Lisa Mercier, who's actually our curatorial staff at the museum, our cultural curatorial staff, will review and do research. We'll speak to the potential donors. So we don't automatically accept donations. We look to see if they're appropriate for the collection that we have. As you can see in these amendments, this time we are expanding the era. So previously, we were only accepting donations up to 1930, and now we're proposing to collect donations from 1930 to 1970, in part because we know we're moving into the new museum and we'll have space to actually store that. So does that answer your first question?
Yeah, I think so. So there is a list that we would look at and say that this is our collection committee.
That is correct.
Okay.
And annually, we do bring that report to you that shows you what the new artifacts are
Right.
that have been added to the collection and the value of those artifacts.
Mm-hmm. So you spoke about space. So does space availability become an issue, even with the new museum? You know, with the artifacts, do we have room? And you know, with donations, you know, coming along, do we foresee any issue in the near future of space issues?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, we do not. A couple of things. We have a very large collection storage area, almost 2,000 square feet proposed, and we are also issuing an RFP for high-density storage. So this is proper museum storage that will allow the shelves to roll tight, and so you can store, you have high-density storage, basically. You can store more artifacts in a smaller space. We actually have room to grow for several years.
Okay, good to hear. Now, moving on to, and can I just keep
Councillor
going
McPherson, I
through?
see you've got a lot of blue bookmarks there.
I tell you,
I'm
this
go-
is
and
an important report.
You are a councillor in the ward where the museum will be built. I'm going to give you 2 more, and then we're going to go on the queue, and then if your questions do not get answered by their councillors, we'll come back to you, I promise.
Okay, I'll come back to that one. So, lots of discussion around what I read in here as staff, if you will. You know, we took, in the report, interpretation and education, we talk about an events and program facilitator. I assume that position exists today, okay. Do we have, or is it coming where we're going to see an operational budget prior to November, December of 2019? So are we gonna see a separate report coming at us that here's what's costing on a day-to-day basis, here's the dedicated staff, here's all the operational costs?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. I think that's a great report to be bringing back at the same time we're preparing the budgets for next year and the ask, because quite frankly, we know the cost will increase with a larger facility. So we'll need to account for that when we're building 2020 budgets, and we'll need to make that business case when we bring it back to you. So that's a great time to do that.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to see that prior to, I mean, we're gonna open the new facility this year, and I would think we'd have an operating budget to when we open, or we are not, we're gonna build. We're gonna build this year. So we're gonna separate out the museum operation budget at the budget time. Not gonna be blended in with the community services budget. It's going to be, here's what it's costing us to run this museum.
We can absolutely do that. I mean, it is part of our budget, but we can separate it out by the appropriate GLs.
Appreciate that. I have others, but.
One more.
Oh, one more, all right. Okay, I'll have a simple one. So, we talk about heating the fry house. Do we heat the fry house today? And to heat that building to 10 degrees C all winter long, to me sounds expensive.
Through
I
you,
don't know
Mr. Chairman, I
whether
need
it's
to defer to
insulated,
staff on
it's-
that, because I'm not sure to the extent that we have to for the preservation of the actual building, but not because we occupy the space. But we do have artifacts in that particular building as well.
So do we heat it today?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McPherson, we do, as Director McKay said, we do have delicate artifacts that are in that building that need to be climate controlled. So there is some operational expense to that. The Celsius degree that it's heated to, I can investigate that specifically and get back to you if you'd like, Councillor.
Yeah, I just assume that we are not, because we're referencing here, but if we are, then the cost is already being incurred to do that. So that would be good to know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great questions. If you could just turn off your mic, Counselor. Counselor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. I don't know if I have any questions left, but maybe it is a big report. Is there anything that you can highlight, like any major changes that you can just, point out to us, like anything that's totally new? I was reading through it all, and I'm just not sure what we did have before. So is there anything really, any big changes that we need to be aware of?
I don't think there's any major changes. We do have these policies reviewed on an annual basis as we submit our CMOG application. So if CMOG, if the province is requiring more of museums or tightening up of standards or new insertions like Code of Ethics, so Code of Ethics under the governance is now included, additional Indigenous ethics is included. They give us that direction, and then we add them to the policies where appropriate.
Thank you, Shannon. And I just have one other comment. It's not actually a question, just in regards to the name. And I know at the AGM, we spoke about this, about including the Jordan Historical Museum of the 20 somewhere in there. But I know this is just for funding purposes, the name. But I'm just putting that out there, that so it's not forgotten.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, it's not forgotten at all. We haven't gotten to the point of deciding, is the site named, is the museum named, is it all named? We respect that and value that, and we want to recognize that and pay tribute to that in signage and plaque and in storytelling at the site. We haven't made those final decisions as of yet.
Great, thank you, Shannon.
Mayor Easton, I apologize that you got bumped out of the queue, but the floor is yours.
It's quite all right. I'd like to know how many questions you allowed Councilor McPherson.
I allowed him four plus, but,
4 plus?
4 plus.
I think he was in at 6, yeah.
But you just, I have not put a stop sign in front of you at this point. I know how passionate you are
Mr.
about this
Chairman.
subject.
Mr. Chairman, I will use discretion. Well, Mr. Chairman, I will use discretion. I won't take advantage of your good nature. Mr. Chairman, let me say that it's, Shannon is absolutely correct. We had a major, my colleagues will remember that we had a major vetting of these policies in the last term. So this is really the basis of my questions, because I was just so pleased to see all of them. It was almost too much, though, because you're trying to separate them all out, and so that, of course, you know, that'll probably never happen again, which is probably a good idea. But on page 2 of the first document, 18-19, you know, all of those standards are there, and they really, I read them, and it's not just a list to me. This is really an obligation for council to act. You know, there's just no way in passing this policy that we can say, oh, well, you know, we're not going to work too hard on this in the future. It's pretty clear. And I want to make sure, I know the institution name is going to be addressed, so I'm not going to deal with that. I think it's been pretty well sorted out. But I want to just reinforce that there are standards, it's an obligation of council. My question on this document is whether or not, how can we focus on the diversity of our community now? This is an opportunity, and go beyond the PGs and the United Empire Loyalists. What is the plan? Because it's really, I think, in this document that we maybe need to start looking at the diversity piece of all the other people that have settled here. How are we planning to do that? That's number one, Mr. Chairman.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think I'd like to bring staff up, either Sarah or Lisa, to comment on some of the work and the research that we've been looking at.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor Easton. I think the first thing that will be very helpful in broadening the reach of the museum and the collection is the air expansion, which Director McKay already touched on this evening. Currently, because we are limited to taking donations only up to 1930, we unfortunately have had to turn away some incredible opportunities, missed opportunities. And now that we're expanding that era, we'll be able to reach back out to those donors or potential donors and see if they're still interested in providing those artifacts to our collection. And there are some pretty unique and exciting things that we've seen. So that's one of the rationales about why we're bringing the air expansion forward. And I know Lisa has some comments she would like to share as well.
Forgive me, I'm slightly shaking. I rode my bike here not thinking I'd be speaking today. So certainly we have had to turn away some pieces as a result of them being not conducive to the cutoff era. One thing in museums are the collection of oral histories, which I find fascinating personally. The database that we have enables us to add media files. So we're able to collect oral histories, and then rather than having a tangible good, you're able to just upload the media, the oral history, then and there, which is kind of neat. Additionally, one thing that we're trying to do at the museum is, having now moved to Beamsville, collecting more pieces signifying the transition of the museum from Jordan to Beamsville. So within the accession number, it denotes a specific year, and as a result of the move, we've actually welcomed pieces that fit within the parameters but are relative to Beamsville, signifying the institutional history as well as the history of the area. which is something that I've reached out to my colleagues at the Canadian Museum of History specifically, and told them about this unique opportunity, and they thought that it was a fabulous idea. So in that regard, we're able to expand that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very, very pleased that we, Mr. Chairman, that we have ensured that we have curatorial staff. I've forgotten a lot of what is in the collection, but I know that this is a very valuable collection, and we should not underestimate it either from a historic or cultural perspective, or even the sheer value of some elements of it. So if the three of you could stay there, because, stay with us. Let me go then to CS 18, or 0819 on page 16, under the de-accession, because we have some legacy issues here, and I think that we can handle them under communication. And I want to ask you whether or not, I don't have any problem with the policy. I want to know what your plan is to communicate this to members, because there are people in the community who were very dissatisfied with the previous policy. How do we bring them up to speed, and how do we build that confidence again in what they know the standards ought to be? Because some of these people are quite knowledgeable.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So I do know, having read some historical reports on de-accessioning that happened, there was very little information coming forth to this group about the items that were being de-accessioned and why. Our practice now and our processes are to thoroughly research before we make the decision to consider de-accessioning, and then put together a report to support that, or information to be contained in a report. So as Lisa has been going through the collection to pack artifacts up for the move, she has identified items that we should de-accession. And she can speak to, perhaps at a high level, why that is, but then how we move forward, because de-accessioning is it's a very serious action that a museum takes, and there's a lot of communications that has to go on and a lot of decision points. So it's not about saying we don't value or don't want these items. There's a business case to be made as to why they should be de-accessioned, and then there's a process that follows that. So our items can be de-accessioned from the collection, but they can still remain with the institution as educational artifacts that then we can use in programming, and we can use for teaching, and we can use when we have the children come in the summer and the Fun Fridays and things like that. We offer them up to other museums where they may be more appropriately suited in those other museums. So there's quite a process to create the argument, if you will, that items should be de-accessioned, and then there's quite a process to follow through on how that de-accessioning happens.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't feel, I'm satisfied with that answer, and I think the policy is quite clear. I just want to make sure that the community, when I say the community, I mean the people that were involved in the museum in the past, who are still local and have had those experiences, and I think proactively will want to know how we plan to proceed in the future. And if that point could be made, and if the staff would follow through on that, I believe that it would be, I think it would be a good and positive road forward. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to look at page 20. This is a conservation standard. This is my third question. And I would like to know what the plans are for measuring and auditing. Now, my reason for asking this question is that in the past, when there was a building that was very inadequate, the council would hear the great litany of the problems with the building and the risks and all the rest of it. However, there was then an acceptance that things weren't great, we don't really have a place for things, they're not, they just can't be protected to the extent. However, as we found out over time, it actually became much more than that. And so my question now is, how does the council accept this policy, and it is a fine policy, how do we accept that this policy is going to be administered beyond trust? Because you don't always have the same people doing the job all the time. How do we know that, do we have an audit process where someone comes and has a look at the way we are protecting things or not? What is the standard in museums now for that, or is it all based on trust?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's more than trust, because in order for us to submit our applications to the province as an example for an operating, we are saying these are the things we are doing. Could they come in and look at that and check that out? Absolutely. And if somebody were to complain and tell them we weren't doing something that we should be, they would probably take a look at that. But they are relying on museum staff to be honest and professional and know what they're doing, and to be true when they say, these are our policies, these are our practices, these are our procedures that we follow. And we ensure that we hire the appropriately trained staff. We ensure that we continue professional development for staff, so that when we bring them aboard, we're going to have SOPs and manuals and guidelines exactly like we do in other areas of the Community Services Department.
Right, okay, because otherwise I was going to suggest that just like you're going to bring forward reports on deaccessioning and with the justifications, and those are always very beneficial, that it would not be, outside of the realm of reasonable to have the curator come and give us a bit of a story on some scenarios where maybe it was a challenge to provide certain protection because of the quality of something or the deteriorating state. Keeping the council informed about what's going on here has a great deal to do with how the funding flows, and I think that it's important to understand that. We really need to buy into what's happening here, not see this as an additional burden, not see this as an increase in operating cost, but truly understand what's required so that we can support. So Mr. Chairman, I would strongly suggest that you consider some type of an audit process, because I think we need to bridge a gap here, because there have been so many years where the artifacts were not in the most ideal conditions. I don't have anything to say there. Under the area of research standard on page 30, I want to be assured, Mr. Chairman, that there's a relationship with the Friends of Lincoln's History and the archives, and that those volunteers and the museum are working cheek by jowl in every possible case to ensure that we are enhancing all the elements of heritage in this community. So I would ask through you, Mr. Chairman, to Ms. McKay, how will council know when that is in its stable state?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll start. Well, it's fortuitous that we have Lisa here, because Lisa has been our staff who has been working with the Friends of Lincoln and the archives, and even the staff at the library who also have archives. So,
absolutely. I go to the archives regularly in terms of genealogy history. They're a very wealthy resource for everything within Lincoln. We have summer students that are beginning as well, and so on the tour that we give, an introductory tour, the archives is certainly a stop that we make. They're a very valuable resource, and we are in communication with them when new items are acquired. If we have any questions as to relative provenance or people, or certainly if people come into the museum asking or wanting a question or something about a specific topic, we direct them to the archives should we not have the appropriate resources for them.
Very good. Mr. Chairman, I just want to ask one question in the governance section on page 37, and just make the point again. I think this is a very important one for all of council to read and understand, because the mandate is very clear. Once we pass this, it's not a matter of saying we're going to do it only 25% of it, or we're only going to do 40% of it. We're all in here in terms of how this is going to be done. But I do have a question through you, Mr. Chairman, about whether or not, and this goes back to a report that we had from Ms. Ain regarding volunteers earlier in the development of those committees. Is it your plan to have subcommittees, possibly around fundraising, possibly around the management of it, you know, the decisions around programming? Is there any role at all for the community in any of those elements in the future?
Absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chairman. When we look to some of our colleague museums, they are successful because they have those committees and those volunteers. As an example, the St. Catharines Museum has upwards of 70 volunteers who perform various roles. They are docents, they are researchers, they help in artifact preservation. So it is our intent to reach out to the community, to engage many more individuals in their roles of training, in their roles of interest, to help us do more than we can with a very small museum team.
Great, okay. I think that helps with some of the budget discussions as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Patriva.
Thank you, Chair Bernay. Just a couple questions. On page 28, what is the Smithsonian Exhibit Guidelines? When it talks about exhibition standards. I know of the Smithsonian Institute, so I figure it's got something to do with that, but second bullet point.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we can get back with exactly what those are and provide you a hyperlink, but they're
Okay.
going to be a set of standards that staff look to.
Okay. And my other question, because every day we find out about another cut in the provincial budget guidelines, and I know that we've been receiving the maximum contribution since 2017 of $25,461, but knowing that everything is on the chopping block from libraries to you name it, though we're going to be able to get beer in a corner store. Any thoughts or any apprehension about the funding? And is there any talk in the museum community about, you know, next steps or I don't like to, I always give my wife this because she operates on what ifs, but seeing what's coming, I think this is a pertinent what if.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Patriva, that question is a great question, and unfortunately, we don't have any indication at this time that the funding should be changing. We have been in regular contact with our ministry representatives. The application for CMOG is due in June, so we will be pending your approval of these policy updates. We will be applying to receive the maximum amount again, and our representative has not indicated at this time that we should expect to receive any less, that there will be any changes.
As promised, Councillor McPherson.
And thank you, Chair Bernay, for indulging me for one final question. And it's in the exhibition standard, and very pleased to see reference made to traveling exhibits, as there's been lots of discussion, you know, over the course of time in building this museum, that we didn't want to just replace the old museum. We wanted a very vibrant, active museum. So very pleased to see, you know, that there is a focus on refreshing the museum with traveling exhibits. My question along those lines is, was there any, or is there any discussion around a museum board? And I'm not specifically talking about volunteers. I'm talking about a board that would actively be looking at traveling exhibits, that type of thing. Similar to, you know, other museums have non-staff, you know, that are volunteering their time, and they're the decision makers. So it's an active board that would be looking out for our best interests in making it the most vibrant museum we can make it.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yeah, absolutely, since the beginning, actually, since the beginning of coming to the town of Lincoln and talking about the build of this project, we have discussed that a new governance model will need to be looked at, including potentially a board, including greater volunteers, including many more formalized committees, maybe even a foundation that looks at ongoing funding for not just capital projects like maybe site work, but traveling exhibits that are way beyond our reach because of cost currently, or other, preservation tools and things that we need. We were successful this year in securing another grant, a $50,000 grant, actually from the federal level of government, in which Lisa was able to purchase camera and equipment for taking pictures of the artifacts with proper lighting, a bunch of materials for packing up safely packing up the artifacts. So, yeah, we absolutely welcome looking at that. And I think, what I would say to all of you this evening is you're going to see us bring these policies forward next year before the museum opening with a lot more changes pertaining to governance and in a lot of areas which will really, I hope, bring you confidence in how we open the museum and going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, just, is there provisions within this report that allows the town itself to generate income from the new museum itself?
Can you repeat the question?
I'm just curious, like, so where I'm going is, my thoughts are that we're gonna be building this brand-new museum. Myself, as a traveler, when I like to travel, when I go to a museum or I go to a town, I like to buy a little trinket, or I like to buy something that reminds me of that place. Being a new museum that's going to be built, my thoughts are that there's going to be a lot of people that would want to buy a souvenir of some sort, perhaps, to remember the town that they visited. Not everyone's going to buy a piece of art. Not everyone's going to buy, a steel statue or something like that, but they may perhaps spend $15, $20. And I don't want to step on the toes of the volunteer organization. They run a gift shop, but that's off-site. And if I'm a tourist traveling at a museum or traveling, I'm purchasing on-site. And I'm just wondering if there's, within this report, I see a little mention here about volunteer organizations and their duty and their roles, but I don't see anywhere really where we have the ability, or the volunteers have the ability to generate income within the museum itself, any museum.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, we can absolutely have gifts or souvenirs, if you will, for sale. We have a small area. Speaking from our museum colleagues, gift shops don't generate a lot of income. However, you're absolutely correct. When tourists come through town, they do like to have a souvenir or a takeaway. So we will be looking at that. And that does not need to be identified here. Currently, the museum is owned and operated by the municipality. That change was made in 1995, if I'm correct. So we have the ability to do that, and many museums do. They don't take up a lot of space, but they do sell souvenirs.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have no one else in the queue. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, Lisa, especially you that rode your bicycle here. You did amazing, great resource and great information. Sarah and Shannon, thank you very much. I didn't anticipate we were going to have this discussion under the policy revision, but I've actually been waiting 2 years to talk about some of this stuff, so it's a great opportunity to start the dialogue, and good to hear that we will be hearing more about governance and all those things as we move along. So, we have a motion to receive for information Report CS-08-19 regarding the 2019 Town of Lincoln Museum and Cultural Center, home of the Jordan Historical Museum, of the 20 policy revisions. To approve the adoption of the revised standards for implementation effective immediately and through submission to the Province of Ontario's Community Museum Operating Grant CMOG program. We will require a mover for the motion. Mayor Easton. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. We will now be considering item 7.4, CS-09-19, the use of municipal facilities and parks policy. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and pleased to see this. It makes sense to have one consistent policy across all of our properties. I guess my only question would be communicating this out, and do we anticipate any negative pushback on this? I think, when we looked at, the policy that we redid for funding, we've received some I would say pretty significant pushback, on that. And will this be a subtle change to people? And yeah, there's gonna be people that's gonna change their lives a little bit, or are there people out there right now that are getting things for nothing, or, basically nothing, and now it's gonna change their world, maybe through you to the staff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we will certainly, if approved, share this information with all of our current user groups. This is really a revision of a policy that existed but was only applicable to the Fleming Center. It was developed in 2014 when the building was open. And so while we have policy about how we allocate to Fleming Center, we don't have policy for other facilities, nor did we have anything for the parks. So really was an exercise in providing consistency across all of the facilities and parks and how we operate. A lot of what is in here, and duly noted about next time providing the highlights and the strike-throughs to make it easier for council to review. A lot of what is in here is consistent to what we had before. There aren't any massive changes. We have noted some updated regional and provincial policy work in terms of no smoking and no vaping that was not included last time. Things of that nature that really should be in effect in all of our facilities anyways. So we do not anticipate any pushback from any groups. It won't change how we allocate facilities. The process is exactly the same.
Okay, happy to hear that. Thank you.
Councillor Pachariva.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. Through you, and that pleases me that we're, updating a policy that was there, and now we're extending it over the other facilities that we have, because, and I appreciate that we'll have the strike-throughs identifying the changes. I saw the bold type of the vaping and the smoking, so appreciate that. Just wondering the timelines for implementation, because we approved that policy at last month's meeting and created a bit of a firestorm because the policy was in effect the next day and there was no consultation with those groups. So just hoping that, so our parks are open, so I assume and that this is going to be effective now, but along Councillor McPherson's, are we going to have a sit down with the user groups to say, this is new, this is what you've done in the past, we will work through with you further bookings?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we're currently meeting with a number of user groups on the aforementioned policy from last month to ensure that we're moving forward in a positive direction. The policy you have in front of you is slated to take effect June 1st, should you approve and should it be ratified. So Until that time, we would wait for your approval to share this with groups, but certainly we're in contact with them regularly, and we've met with a number of them in the last week, and will continue to do so. So we will be sharing this with them readily as soon as it's approved by council.
I have no one else on the queue, so we have a motion to approve the use of the municipal facilities and parks policies as outlined in Report CS-09-19, effective June 1st, 2019. This policy revision replaces the Town of Lincoln Community Complex Facility Allocation Policy. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Rinjema. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 7.5, CS 10-19, the 2019 Whipple Trust Fund allocation. Are there any questions from council? Thought this was the only one we'd have questions. Seeing no questions, we have a motion to approve the disbursement of interest earned by the Whipple Trust Fund during 2018 in the amount of $1,158.45 to the successful applicants as outlined in Report CS-10-19. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That is carried. We are now considering item 7.6, CS-11-19, the tender award for the Fleming Center Generator Project. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Pachariba.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. I find this report a bit troubling. We approved the, now, granted, the generator should have been part of the build initially, but we can't change. We left money on the table. I know, Chief, you're shaking your head. I know, I was being, so anyway, we approved it in 2017, just following the timeline here. So in the spring of 2018, there was a concern about that the budget may not be sufficient. And then we didn't tender it into Q4 of 2018. And at that time, the generator wasn't going to cover the ice plant. So then we looked at gas versus diesel, bigger and smaller. And now we're covering the refrigeration system. Now, could that not have been identified back in 2017 when the budget came out? Like, if we knew there was an issue, why did we wait and why did we not look at that? It's the timeline here that I find problematic.
Ms. McKay?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I couldn't agree with you more, Councillor. I can't speak to how the costs were arrived at, and I can't speak to the decisions that were going through the staff at time and the management at time, but what I can speak to is what's happened since then. So we did go out to see if what we suspected was true. It did come back over budget. We looked at, okay, do we want to cover the refrigeration plant as well, which operationally is pretty important. So not just about a community operations center in the event. So we're pretty pleased with where we've landed, while it's not ideal from a start.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the due diligence that's come since, and I want to say I don't care what happened BS, and that's before Shannon, that it's after Shannon's here. Because again, if this stuff would have been brought to council with a report, we could have made changes, we could have pivoted, we could have asked. So including the ice plant, fabulous, because like you say, if the power goes out and you lose the ice, you're down 2 weeks and that's money. So, thank you for bringing this forward. Thank you for making the changes. Thank you for being diligent.
Mary Stin.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to clarify the location of this. Is this on the roof, or does this sit on the ground?
Great question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor. It will sit on the ground on the let me just get my direction, southwest area of the facility.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, maybe I'll wait then. I have a question about the noise barriers. So if you, can I just check with you, I can make it under committee remarks?
Sure.
Or
You can make it right now
I
if you
can
want.
make it now? Okay, then I would like to know whether with this purchase and everything, is everything complete at the Fleming Center now? Because it seems to me that that was an outstanding issue. That's my question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest to you that there are user groups who would say, no, not everything is complete, and that is why the scoreboard project came forward to council as a capital project ask as in the 2019 budget.
Okay, and what about the noise barriers in relation to the neighbors?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor, yes, we are exploring more cost-effective solutions for those noise barriers on the existing mechanical equipment that's up on the roof.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, could we just table this again then? I mean, I don't think we want to get into a big discussion about it, but I don't think I quite understand what's happening with that, because I thought it was just a matter of, it was going to get done. We had approved budget for it, but it doesn't seem that we have quite all the information. I don't know whether, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about what is not under the recommendations, but clearly there's some outstanding issues that are not quite dealt with. How would you like to?
No, it's a great point. I mean, let's face it, we're just about to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the opening of the Fleming Center, and we still have residents in that ward that have concerns. I believe, in fairness to Shannon and Sarah, we have resurrected some of those concerns recently with those residents on Park Avenue and West. We're trying to come up with some viable solutions that fall within a certain, dollar amount, to try to keep it within a certain number. I'm anticipating we're going to hear something back, but I agree with what you're saying.
So it'll come to committee then?
I'm very hopeful it will.
I'm fine. I mean, we
Shannon
haven't-
is shaking her head, and I do believe that is the intent.
Okay. Well, we have a few months, I guess, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you very much.
But like anything, people aren't sitting out in their backyards barbecuing it on their decks in the wintertime. So now is we're gonna hear the increased concerns as people go outside. So the time is of essence.
So how do you want to handle this thing? Because this is
Yeah.
one of the last things, I suspect.
Yeah, so I do believe we've just had a resurgence of these concerns just in the last 4 to 6 weeks, and I know Shannon and Dave Warden and Sarah are working on it. So I'm quite hopeful that we will get something here in the near future back to council. Shannon?
And if I may, through you, Mr. Chairman, noise concerns about this particular award and installation, we will only hear this in the event that, in the event that we actually have to use it as backup and/or when we are testing it for preventative maintenance. But we will be building a fence or something around this structure. We have allocated some funds into the contingency and miscellaneous for that in this project.
Sound attenuation?
Yeah, so it's.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the update.
So before we go on, I just, I certainly appreciate Councillor Patriva's comments, but we can't go back. We have to go forward. And, just for the new councillors, I mean, the Fleming Center was a 15 to 16 million with land acquisition. It was a big investment. And, when you look at this report, and I know everybody's read it, but, in the event of an emergency situation, the Fleming Center is a big building where we can have people come there for safe haven. And to have a facility there that doesn't have a backup generator after 5 years is really not acceptable. So I'm really glad to see this, and I'm glad it's coming through.
Yeah, I'm on. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor McPherson.
So to the mayor's question about location, so is this movable? Certainly not portable, but is it movable? And I'm thinking about that location. When we went through the whole gyrations of the junior hockey team coming, there was talk about a separate dressing room, separate. And when looking at the building, that corner potentially could be, that very, rooms and a location if there was a need for it down the road. So, I'd hate to see us permanently put a generator there and forfeit that opportunity, down the road. And if there was a way of sticking it on the roof, is that an option, or was it just less expensive or, more convenient to put it where we're putting it?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll have to get back to you as to why that location. I'm going to suggest that it was the consultants who did the specifications who recommended that. Is it movable? It's always movable with a cost and fees that come
Right.
along with that. But I can provide more information on that, on your question, back to all members of council.
Yeah, right now, that's a lawn back there, I think, that, the manicured lawn, and it just was a piece of the building that isn't built out yet, that, maybe it's not in this term of council, but down the road, is it needed for whatever, a gym, whatever, whatever we're gonna put in there. So, just some food for thought there. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, we have a motion to receive for information report CS-11-19 regarding the award of contract to purchase and install a backup generator at the Fleming Center. To approve awarding of contract to Comtrade Trademark Industrial, Inc., Cambridge, Ontario, in the amount of $315,100 excluding HST. To approve the reallocation of $62,000 from the Emergency Operations Center EOC project and an additional $44,000 in funding from long-term borrowing for the Fleming Center generator project, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign and seal the contract documents on behalf of the municipality. We will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Patriva. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Confidential items. We have no confidential items this evening. Staff remarks. Do we have any staff remarks? I'm seeing two hands in the background. Ladies first. Shannon.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, because it's come up a couple times this evening, the previous policies, the new Grow, Prosper, Belong Fund and the community group allocation policy, I wanted to let all members of council know that we have been working closely with our community groups to gather their comments, their feedback. We are regrouping as a team. We've encouraged groups to make their submissions, and it was never our intent to negatively impact any of the relationships we have with some very long-standing and important groups, but we will be working closely with them to make the appropriate revisions to the policies. As I've said to a couple of councillors I've spoken with and the community groups and to our CAO, Mr. Kokopoulos, we had the best intentions, and we certainly look at what other municipalities are doing and try to take the best of breed of what's out there. and where we probably did not admittedly spend enough time, and for that I apologize, is really looking at these policies with a Lincoln lens and how they would impact specific groups. So knowing that we put in percentages on memberships and knowing that we put in specific numbers, had we reached out to some of those longstanding groups and asked that question and maybe tested the revisions we proposed with them, we probably would have made some tweaks before we brought them in the state that we did to you. So I apologize. I want to let you know that we are working on it. I have made several phone calls directly to a number of groups, and I hope you'll hear positive things in the not-too-distant future about those policies.
Thank you, Shannon. Mr. Graham?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to remind everyone that on Saturday, May the 25th, we're going to be doing our Touch a Truck community event, so definitely look forward to that. It's from 10 till 2, and we have parking off-site like normal at the Lincoln Center and Beansville High School, and we're going to have our U-Link bus shuttling people back and forth, so, and there's a great barbecue, and so be a good time.
Thank you very much for staff remarks. Do we have any committee remarks? Councilor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Director Graham. So with regards to speed and our speed analysis data, so we're obviously heading into the summer months now, and I'm just wondering if is there a separate report coming with possible actions or the problem areas and what we plan to do, or does that come with the transportation master plan? Is where are we at with that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, so currently our digital speed sign program is up and running. You've probably seen signs around the community.
Right beside my house.
Okay, so that's
Which
happening.
reminded me of it.
Yeah, for sure. So I will check our website, but I know we do have the program on the website that is planned for this year with a map, so I'll make sure that's updated. And
That's not my question. My question is acting on the data, and when are we acting on the data?
So, through you, Mr. Chairman, so that's an ongoing process. It's a phased process, so we do our counts, we assess our data, and then we go to our next steps, and whether that is, more signage, looking at traffic calming. We also are dovetailing it into the transportation master plan that you made mention of. So one of the major deliverables from the transportation master plan is that we are developing a traffic calming policy to help guide the town. So as we collect data, if we notice there is a concern with speeding, we are going to have a policy and a process on how to go deeper and more forward with that if we're going to look at more permanent traffic calming investments like speed humps and that kind of thing. So
And that's exactly where I'm going, Dave, is now 3 years down the road, are we 3 years down the road since we started our sign data collection? And, I'm not sure, we changed some speed limits in the urban area, but, when you look at, what physically have we done, I'm not sure any of us can say, what's changed. So that's the report that I guess I'm asking about is, 8th Street, are we gonna do something, or 9th, are we gonna do something there? Or, are we just gonna use enforcement, or what's the plan? I think that's really, where are the problem areas and what's the plan for those problem areas? Okay, thank you.
Mary Easton. Director Graham, did you want to comment on that? It was actually one of my 4 questions I've got here as well.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, so we will be bringing updates to committee on that motion, definitely. Since the motion has been created, we've been moving with different actions from that in terms of reaching out into the region to get a lot of things started at the region or find out where a lot of things are at with truck traffic and you know, we're also talking to the NRP as well. So we don't have much to report on right now in terms of results, but we definitely will bring a report on some better work plan items and timelines moving forward.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to reinforce that the purpose of that motion was to ensure that the concerns of our citizens had all been documented in one place at one time with direction from council. We realize that we will not achieve 100% in every area, but the purpose is to ensure that there are ongoing reports, because we intend to put some pepper behind this. It's the only way that I can explain it. We are not going to sit on our hands, and we do want to make sure that where we can make change and where we can influence, that it's actually happening. So I just want to be really clear about that, because I think that we are in a very, we are sitting in a position that I don't think that we want to be losing much more sleep over the safety concerns that we have in the community, particularly on Mountain Street. So I just want to make that absolutely clear.
Okay, unfortunately, the mayor was off cue, so did anyone miss what she said? Did everyone capture what she was articulating? No, unfortunately, you clicked it. But I heard you. I just want to make sure that everyone. But for the record, I think it's important. Yes, okay, so. Okay, so. Okay, so, hang on. Okay,
Want me to go out?
turn off.
Next. You're on. No, I'm back in.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll just repeat that. The question that I asked you was in regard to why there was no item on the agenda regarding the truck policy, the truck motion that had been passed by council at the last council meeting. And the reason I'm asking this question is because the purpose of that motion was to ensure, to assure the public that we had heard their concerns, and we've heard them for a long time. They have been very patient. And that it is our plan not to sit on our hands with this, but to find solutions. Do we expect to have 100% in every area? Possibly not. I would say that there are areas that will be more difficult than others. I have no reason to believe that the staff are not pushing hard in every area that they can. But I also want to make sure that the public understand that there are action plans that are in place, that they are being implemented, and that there are outcomes. Whether the outcomes are positive or negative, they need to be reported. And if we need to take alternative actions, we will only be able to make those decisions if we have information in front of us. So that's all I wanted to say about that. Thank you.
Your point is heard loud and clear.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to just ask a quick question about Crokage Park.
You turned your,
Oh, I'm sorry, was there somebody else behind me?
well, you turned yourself off. You just, yeah,
So I'm out.
I'm sorry,
okay.
Go back in.
my apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
I wanted to ask a quick question about Crokage Park, because I have had some questions. Doesn't need to be a long answer, I just need to know whether or not everything is coming together and approximately when it will be started. That's all I require. Thank you.
Shannon?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor. As soon as we get a nice solid week of sun and warm weather to dry out the ground, they are ready to mobilize.
Okay, so I should interpret from that that there are no technical reasons, other than the weather, this is very good news, that will be having any, there will be no holdups except for the weather.
I'm certainly not aware of any. There's been a pre-site meeting that the CAO, which I think is unheard of, goes to a site meeting with the developer and all the subcontractors. So as far as I know, unless the CAO is, got something to add, we're ready to go. The only thing we're waiting for is the ground to clear up, dry up.
Good, okay.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor, that is absolutely correct. It is a matter of having a long enough stretch of dry weather so that the site works can begin, and that hasn't happened for the last number of months.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I quite understand that, Mr. Chairman. It was the technical elements that I wasn't sure whether all of those things had finally come together. Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Patriva.
Thanks, Chair Brunei. And that was one of my questions, so thanks, Your Worship, for asking that, because I've got that on a number of occasions. And Councillor Brunei, I think it's time that we have another ward meeting and we spread this out, because it would be a great newsletter item. Snack bar at the arena. It has not been a success. When are we going to sit down with Lincoln Minor Hockey and allow them to run this thing so it's operated when people are there?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, that is on our agenda to do. We realize, I wouldn't say it hasn't been a success. There's a number of circumstances that go into these factors. So I want to caution us having a public conversation on these things and assure you that we will be moving forward with an alternative plan.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Question to Mr. Graham now with respect to street sweeping. Wondering where we are in the program, wondering if we can communicate this out, wondering why we started in the East End and not in the urban area, knowing that that's the most curb and gutter and problematic with all of this rain. So just curious to the rationale behind that decision and how we can expedite it.
Through you, Mr. Chairman,
You're not-
through you, Mr. Chairman, so the program is underway. We are a bit behind because of the weather. With street sweeping, it's difficult to sweep when it's raining, and if the material is really wet, it doesn't vacuum and suck up into the machine as well. So the weather has put us a little bit behind, but I don't have a timeline right now, but I can communicate that out later when we anticipate being done street sweeping. Reason for starting the East End, I don't think there was anything specific around that. It's just, we have curb and gutter in the East End as well, and that's where we started this year, so.
Okay, with a follow-up on that, and again, like this is a program that we do, but then we don't communicate it well enough. So what we need to do is we need to be proactive. When we're targeting neighborhoods, we need to let that neighborhood know so they make sure that their vehicles are off the road when the street sweeper's coming. Now, luckily, we're able to, this happens during the day, so most of the people are at work. But again, it's like the keep it clear. If you give people the information and put it in their hands in some way, shape, or form, and they don't take the necessary steps to be a good neighbor, then that's on them. But I think we've got to do better with that. And then I'm going to share a text that I got from a resident who I had to talk off a ledge, and commenting about our roads, and saying that they're in a state of disrepair, and a little tongue-in-cheek about rather than one for Business Development Week, that we should bring in more front-end suspension companies because the state. And I said, okay, let's be specific here. Give me something that I can work with. So, Ontario, South and North Service Roads, Green Lane, Central, Lincoln, anything on Main Street. I guess most are, you're stealing his thunder. I guess most are regional roads. And I want to type back to him that Green Lane's on the docket for this year. So wondering, Central and Lincoln. I know Lincoln's going to continue after the development is finished, so that's in the queue just to be able to talk him further off the ledge, Central. Do you, any idea, Mr. Graham, when it's in the 10-year capital plan? And then I think we have to work with Your Worship and Councillor Foster to ratchet up the region on those regional roads. They did that section of the South Service Road from, I think, about Tufford Road to Vineland, but the first section, and we had, and it's not Miss Rial here saying that that entire section needs to be done, so.
Through Mr. Chairman, I don't have the exact timing on Central handy at the moment, but I can find out. It's definitely will be in there doing any pothole maintenance, if there is any.
All good? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. Through you to Mr. Graham, this just a quick question. Regarding the new Camden Fire Station, and we've talked about the speed limit there. At Tintern, it's an 80, which is almost their neighbor. Have you heard anything regarding that road and the speed request for lowering that 80?
Through Mr. Chairman, Councillor Timmers, I haven't yet. I have reached out to the region again. We did previously request the region to look at reducing the speed there. So I haven't heard anything yet, but I did follow up recently to find out if they've had a chance to review it. So as soon as I get any information back from the region, I'll definitely share that.
I think it's, somewhat dangerous if the fire trucks are pulling out and people are going 90. So I think it's kind of urgent that we move on that, and hopefully we can get that speed lowered sooner than later. So thank you, Dave.
Councillor Benjamin.
Thank you, Chair Renee. This is not something I expect any serious response on tonight, but it's regarding the Transportation Master Plan and some safety, a couple of areas for safety that involve safety issues, and I think we've had discussions on this before, but I don't recall it coming up during the Transportation Master Plan workshop or discussion, and that's when you exit the QEW onto the Bartlett ramp and where it meets the service road. It's a dark corner, and I've had people contact me and say that they don't feel comfortable making that turn, and also the area between Jordan Road and the service road there as well. It's a dark, sort of dangerous corner, and I've had people approach me with concerns about that. So please just consider this input toward the Transportation Master Plan and safety issues. Thank you.
Mary Stin.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to advise that there had been some discussions recently with the staff sergeant regarding high-speed chases on Fly Road. And so any discussion should include them because it is one of the hot spots in the town. Mr. Chairman, I also wanted to note, I have had two members of the public in the East and share with me that they don't appreciate that when we are describing the hamlets and villages in the town that we leave out Vineland Station, Jordan Station, and Rockway. So I'm not, these are legitimate, they are formalized areas of our town. And when we are describing the town and we have that recital, we should be consistent with naming all of the areas, and they are hamlets in our town. So I just want to remind in reports that we don't forget that.
I guess Tintern.
Well, Tintern, these are the three, yes, Tintern, absolutely. Beamsville, Vineland, Vineland Station, Jordan, Jordan Station, Tintern, Rockway, Camden. Thank you.
Yeah, that was actually one of my discussions with my community, or priority discussions today. that we are the town of Lincoln, and yet we're still fractured. Until we solve that problem, we'll continue to talk about it. But it's duly noted.
I think it's come up, Mr. Chairman, because of the regional review.
Right, right. I have no one else in the queue. I had a number of questions that have been answered. I certainly was confronted by a bunch of hockey moms about the food booth at the Fleming Center and some negative comments, so I'm glad to hear that staff is looking at that and we can address that over the summer so we can move forward. I wanted to point out that I've had a number of emails, and he's not here to thank him, but Dan in bylaw, I know, has been working heavily with the ministry from the load inspections where we have load restrictions on roads. He's been dealing with the ministry, getting a full list of all our load restrictions, and they have been out there enforcing, and they have been ticketing vehicles, mostly large trucks that are on these load restriction roads, and now we're forcing, because of violations, we're forcing them off the load restriction. So I wanted to thank Dan and whoever is involved in that, as well as the mayor and Mr. Graham, who have been working with the staff sergeant, and we have, for committee's knowledge, we have 2 items set up. I'm not going to name the dates because that will get out there and then we'll defeat the purpose, but we have one in the summer and one in the fall for the NRP and the MTO to go out and do some ticketing and bring these trucks off the road and make sure that they have their proper brakes and their proper lighting, and doing what we did a couple years ago where we had, I think, 14 violations addressed in about 40 minutes. I do have one question to Director Graham. I know there was an email sent out to committee letting us know, and I believe the CAO then followed up with there's a tender going out for the connectivity to the GO Bus stop. There's a bunch of sidewalks, some culverts, and some lighting. I'm wondering, Director Graham, if you could just inform committee, because that is a joint venture between, I think it's going to be a fairly large contract when we see the number, but you know, the sidewalks is what we've been pushing for, but through Metrolinx and through GO, they're also going to be doing some culverts and some lighting and electrical. So it is a joint venture between the region and the town of Lincoln, and I wonder if you could just bring some clarity to that.
Sure. Thank you, through Mr. Chairman. So this is a really important project for the town. This is building a sidewalk from Ontario Street and the South Service Road by the Esso station there to connect pedestrians to the GO Bus stop, which is located at the car sharing carpool lot there on the South Service Road in Beansville. So this has been a project that we've been, trying to work through. It's had a lot of agencies involved, the MTO, Metrolinx, the region. So I'm happy to update committee that it's out for tender currently. And as Councillor Bernay was saying, that we've partnered with the region. There's going to be some road upgrades and lighting upgrades as a result of this work. So hoping to bring some tender results to the next committee meeting so we can get this project started. But it's really key in promoting our walkability, active transportation, et cetera. So it's a great project.
Councilor Rinjima.
Oh, thank you, Chair Brunei. I had a resident contact me as well, and I don't expect answers on it tonight, but I will follow up later. That the ditch, there was some ditching works done on the west side of Sand Road between John and the tracks, and that the water there is not flowing properly, that it doesn't flow properly. That it's still building up there and remaining, so. Providing that concern to you, and I'll follow up later and ask you some questions about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just one, in a follow-up to Mary Easton's comment about the motion and that we will continue to bring this forward. Director Graham, there was a meeting that took place at the end of February with the mayors of West Niagara, some of the CAOs, and there was a discussion about what we were doing on Mountain Street to direct traffic, and there was some low-bearing fruit that the region said they were going to do. I realize some of that line painting on Mountain Street and King Street between Mountain and Ontario was sensitive to moisture, but I'm hopeful that we can really hold their feet to the fire where, it's been a big item. To the mayor's point, we have a motion now. We want to keep this on the forefront. I think if we can see some green lines that we saw in that meeting, I did send the presentation to my deputy chair, so I hopefully everyone is up to speed on where we are with that. If not, we can have that presentation that we saw that day sent to everyone. But there's some good things, and a lot of those things don't cost a lot of money. They're low-bearing fruit, and then to the mayor's point, now people see that we're actually putting our money where our mouth is. So I'm really hopeful we can see some of those things happening here in the next few weeks with some good weather. Thank you. There being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned.